Do you think you really know your partner? I thought I did. Until the day I walked into my own home and found something that turned my entire world upside down. Picture a cozy marriage, a steady life, a warm house in the heart of Virginia. Now picture a secret lurking beneath that perfect image. A secret so devastating it shatters everything you thought you could trust. It all started with something small, an innocent offer to help a friend. But where it ended, well, let's just say what you're about to hear will change the way you see love, friendship, and betrayal forever. If you've ever had something in your life you were terrified to lose, this story is for you. Katie and I had been married for nearly 10 years. We lived in a cozy two-story house in Fairfax County, the kind of place where neighbors wave politely but mind their own business. She taught art classes at a local community center, and I worked long hours as an architect for a small firm in D.C. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. There was an ease to our routines, weekend hikes at Great Falls, Friday night takeout from the Thai place down the road, and quiet evenings on the couch with Netflix and a bottle of wine. We didn't have kids. Not by choice, exactly. We tried for years, but after a string of miscarriages, we decided to stop putting ourselves through the emotional ringer. Katie poured herself into her painting, and I threw myself into work. We grieved in our own ways, and eventually, we settled into a kind of quiet acceptance. Or at least, I thought we had. The first time Katie mentioned Mike, it was in passing. "He's the guy from the office I told you about," she said one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner. "The one who lost his house. Because of loans, right?" I asked, rinsing a plate under the faucet. "Yeah, it's awful. His wife left him right after it happened. He's been crashing on a friend's couch, but it's not a permanent solution. He's such a nice guy, though. I can't believe he's going through all this." I nodded, distracted. At the time, it seemed like a sad but distant story. One of those things you hear about but never imagine touching your life. But then Katie brought it up again and again. "Do you think we could help him out?" she finally asked one night, her voice tentative. "Help him how?" "Let him stay here for a little while, just until he gets back on his feet. It wouldn't be forever." I hesitated. We'd never opened our home to anyone before. It was our private space, our safe haven. But Katie looked so earnest, so hopeful, and I couldn't deny that she had a kind heart. "I don't know, Katie. I mean, wouldn't it be awkward? I work late, and you'd be here alone with him." She waved off my concern. "Mike's not like that. He's a gentleman. Besides, it might be good for me to have some company. It gets lonely here during the day." Her words hit a nerve. I'd been working longer hours lately, taking on extra projects to save up for a new car. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe I'd been too wrapped up in work to notice. Against my better judgment, I said, "Okay, but just for a little while." Mike moved in the following weekend. He was a lanky guy in his early 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and a self-deprecating sense of humor that put you at ease. He insisted on doing more than his share of chores, cleaning the gutters one afternoon without being asked and even fixing the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. Katie was right. He was easy to like. It wasn't long before I started looking forward to his company during dinner, when we trade jokes and swap stories about our jobs. In the evenings, after I came home from work, I'd sometimes find Mike and Katie sitting on the back porch, chatting over a bottle of wine. It was good to see her laughing again. Her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. I told myself it was fine, healthy, even. She deserved to have a friend, and Mike didn't seem like a threat. He was grateful, respectful, and, as far as I could tell, still licking his wounds from his own marital disaster. But there were small things, little moments that nagged at me. Like the time I came home unexpectedly in the middle of the day and found them watching an old movie in the living room. They were sitting a little too close for comfort, their laughter stopping abruptly when I walked in. Or the time Katie came to bed smelling like Mike's cologne, claiming she'd borrowed his jacket while they were gardening and forgot to take it off. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. Katie had never given me a reason to doubt her before. She was my wife, my partner, my best friend, and Mike? He was just a guy who needed a hand. What kind of person would I be if I couldn't offer that? But trust, as I was about to learn, is a fragile thing. And sometimes, the cracks start forming long before you realize the whole thing is about to come crashing down. Looking back, there were probably 100 tiny moments that should have set off alarm bells, but I ignored them. Denial is funny like that. It lets you convince yourself everything's fine, even when the evidence is staring you in the face. At the time, I chalked up my unease to stress. Work was overwhelming, and I wasn't exactly taking care of myself. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just being insecure. After all, Katie loved me, didn't she? Mike had been with us for about a month when Katie brought up the idea of hosting a dinner party. "It's been so long since we've had people over," she said, leaning against the kitchen counter with a glass of wine. "And Mike's been such a big help around here. It'd be nice to do something for him." I hesitated. Socializing wasn't high on my priority list, but Katie's enthusiasm was contagious, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to have a little fun. So, the following Saturday, we invited a few friends and neighbors over for drinks and dinner. Mike was the life of the party. He had this effortless charisma that drew people in, and by the end of the night, everyone was singing his praises. "You're lucky to have this guy around," one of our neighbors said, clapping him on the back. "He's a keeper." Katie beamed, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. It wasn't rational, but it was there, bubbling under the surface. I brushed it off and focused on cleaning up after the guests had left. That night, as we got ready for bed, I noticed Katie was unusually quiet. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. "You okay?" I asked, pulling back the covers. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just tired." I didn't press her. Maybe she was just worn out from the party. Or maybe there was something she wasn't telling me. I couldn't be sure. The weeks that followed were uneventful on the surface, but there was a tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. Katie and Mike seemed to have settled into a comfortable rhythm, sharing inside jokes and spending more time together during the day while I was at work. They'd cook meals, listen to music, and sometimes take long walks around the neighborhood. Katie told me it was good for her to have a distraction, that Mike was helping her get out of her shell. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that I was being edged out. One evening, I came home to find the two of them in the kitchen, laughing over a glass of wine. They'd made dinner, a fancy pasta dish with fresh herbs and roasted vegetables. "You're just in time," Katie said, her cheeks flushed. We were about to set the table. "Smells great," I said, forcing a smile. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," Mike said with a grin. "Just thought we'd try something new." The food was delicious, but I couldn't enjoy it. I kept noticing the way they glanced at each other, the way their laughter came a little too easily. It was probably nothing, I told myself, just two friends enjoying a good meal. But the knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. Later that night, after Mike had gone to bed, I confronted Katie. "Is everything okay between us?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She frowned, clearly caught off guard. "Of course. Why would you ask that?" "I don't know," I said, shrugging. "You've just seemed different lately." "Different how?" I struggled to find the right words. "I don't know. Like you're distant." Katie sighed and reached for my hand. "I'm not distant. I've just been trying to stay busy. You know how hard it's been since." Her voice trailed off, but I knew what she meant. "Since the miscarriage." "I get that," I said softly. "I just want to make sure we're okay." She nodded, her eyes misty. "We are. I promise." I wanted to believe her, but the seed of doubt had already been planted, and it was starting to grow. The breaking point came about a week later. I'd stayed late at the office to finish up a project, and by the time I got home, it was nearly midnight. The house was quiet, the lights dimmed. I dropped my bag by the door and made my way upstairs, eager to collapse into bed. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard a sound, a soft murmur, coming from the direction of our bedroom. My heart skipped a beat. I stood frozen, straining to hear. It was Katie's voice, low and hushed, followed by a faint chuckle. My stomach twisted. Slowly, carefully, I crept down the hall, my pulse pounding in my ears. The door was ajar, just enough for me to see inside. Katie was sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone pressed to her ear. Her face was illuminated by the glow of the screen, her expression unreadable. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but the tone of her voice, soft, intimate, sent a chill down my spine. Who was she talking to? And why did it feel like something I wasn't supposed to hear? I stepped back, retreating down the hall before she could notice me. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell was going on in my own house. The next morning, I tried to act normal, but the unease from the previous night clung to me like a shadow. Katie seemed her usual self, cheerful and chatty as she made coffee and flipped through the morning paper. If she'd noticed me creeping around the house the night before, she didn't let on. Mike came downstairs not long after, still in his pajamas. "Morning, guys," he said with a yawn. "What's the plan for today?" Katie smiled. "I was thinking we could head to that farmer's market in town. Maybe pick up some fresh stuff for dinner." "Sounds good to me," Mike replied, grabbing a mug from the cupboard. He turned to me. "What about you, man? You in?" I hesitated, caught off guard. Normally, I would have begged off, citing work or some other excuse. But something in me shifted. I needed to start paying attention, to watch, to listen. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. "Why not?" The farmer's market was a bustling maze of stalls, selling everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts. Katie and Mike seemed to be in their element, bantering with the vendors and laughing as they sampled jams and cheeses. I trailed behind them, feeling like an outsider in my own life. At one point, Katie held up a bunch of sunflowers. "Aren't these beautiful?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "They're perfect," Mike said, grinning. "You should get them." Katie blushed, a subtle pink that made my stomach churn. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I watched as she handed the vendor a few bills and tucked the flowers under her arm, smiling like a teenager with a crush. By the time we got home, I was wound so tight I could barely think straight. Katie disappeared into the kitchen to start dinner, and Mike headed upstairs to shower. I sat in the living room, staring at the bouquet of sunflowers on the coffee table, my thoughts spiraling. I needed answers. But how do you confront someone when you don't even know what you're accusing them of? That night, as Katie slept beside me, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I reached for her phone. My hands trembled as I unlocked the screen. Katie wasn't particularly secretive about her passwords. She told me them all 100 times. But as I scrolled through her messages, a knot of guilt tightened in my chest. This felt wrong, like I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Most of her texts were harmless. Chats with friends, updates from her mom, reminders about upcoming appointments. But then I saw it. A string of messages from Mike. At first glance, they didn't seem incriminating. "Thanks for your help today," one read. "Dinner was amazing. Couldn't have done it without you," said another. But there was a familiarity to their tone, an ease that felt intimate, like they weren't just roommates or friends. And then there was the photo. It wasn't anything scandalous, just a picture of Katie in the kitchen, holding up a tray of freshly baked cookies. But it wasn't the photo itself that bothered me. It was the caption, "You're incredible." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Was I overreacting? Reading too much into an innocent exchange? Or was this the proof I'd been dreading? The next morning, I confronted Katie. "Sort of. Do you and Mike talk a lot when I'm not around?" I asked casually as we sipped our coffee. She frowned, clearly puzzled by the question. "I mean, I guess. We live in the same house, so, yeah. Do you text a lot, too?" Katie set her mug down and gave me a curious look. "Why are you asking?" "No reason," I said quickly. "Just wondering." She didn't press me, but the tension in the room was palpable. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, replaying our conversation over and over in my mind. Was she hiding something? Or was I just driving myself crazy? That evening, I came home to find Katie and Mike in the backyard, sitting by the fire pit. They were laughing, their faces glowing in the flickering light. I stood in the doorway, watching them, feeling like a ghost in my own life. I didn't join them. Instead, I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. My mind was a storm of doubt, anger, and fear. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff, and the ground beneath me was crumbling. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the truth. Not yet. Because once you cross that line, there's no going back. It wasn't long before the cracks in our carefully constructed little world began to show. I started noticing things, small, subtle details that would have meant nothing to me a month ago, but now felt like glaring red flags. Mike's car was parked in the driveway more often than I expected, even on days when he supposedly had errands to run or job interviews to attend. Katie's mood seemed lighter, more vibrant, like she was carrying a secret that made her glow. At first, I told myself it was just her art. She'd been painting more lately, locking herself in the spare room for hours and emerging with streaks of color on her hands and a satisfied smile on her face. But something about her energy felt different. I tried to ignore it, to push the doubts out of my mind, but they kept creeping back in, whispering in the quiet moments. I felt like a stranger in my own life, like I was watching my marriage play out from the outside and couldn't stop the unraveling. Then, one evening, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I came home a little earlier than usual. Traffic had been merciful for once, and as I pulled into the driveway, I saw Katie and Mike through the kitchen window. They were standing close, too close, their heads bent together over something on the counter. She was laughing, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I sat in the car for a long moment, watching them through the glass. My chest felt tight, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I finally got out and walked inside, they both jumped like I'd caught them doing something they weren't supposed to. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Katie said quickly, stepping back from Mike. "We were just, trying to fix the coffee grinder. It jammed again." Mike nodded, his expression a little too casual. "Yeah, these things are more complicated than they look." I glanced at the counter. The coffee grinder sat there, looking perfectly fine. My eyes flicked back to Katie, who was avoiding my gaze. "Right," I said slowly. "Well, I'm starving. What's for dinner?" Katie jumped at the chance to change the subject, bustling around the kitchen and rattling off the menu. But the air between us felt heavy, charged with unspoken tension. I sat at the table, watching her move, my thoughts spinning like a hurricane. After dinner, I pretended to have some work to finish and went upstairs to our bedroom. I couldn't shake the image of them standing so close. The way her laugh had sounded so natural, so unguarded. Was I losing her? Had I already lost her? The next day, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I followed her. She'd mentioned earlier in the week that she had plans to meet a friend for lunch, so when she left the house, I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and slipping out the door. I kept a safe distance as I tailed her car, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. She drove to a small cafe in town, the kind of place we used to go to on weekends before life got so complicated. I parked a little ways down the street and watched as she got out of the car. My stomach dropped when I saw Mike step out of a car parked nearby. They hugged. Not a friendly, quick embrace, but something longer, something that made my blood run cold. They didn't go inside the cafe. Instead, they walked to a nearby park, their heads close as they talked. I stayed in the car, watching them through the windshield. My heart felt like it was being crushed in a vice. This was it, the proof I'd been dreading. They didn't have to kiss, didn't have to touch for me to know. The way they moved together, the way they looked at each other, it was all I needed to see. I wanted to confront them right then and there, to march up and demand answers. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the faint, desperate hope that I was wrong, that there was some innocent explanation for all of this. When I got home that evening, Katie acted like everything was normal. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and started making dinner like it was any other night. I went along with it, pretending everything was fine, but inside, I was a mess. That night, after she'd fallen asleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't keep pretending. Something was going on, and I needed to know the truth. But how do you confront the person you love most in the world when you're terrified of the answer? The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the not knowing. The uncertainty was eating me alive, and I knew I couldn't take much more of it. Something had to give. And soon, the next morning, I woke up with a sense of resolve. I wasn't going to let this fester anymore. Whatever was happening, I needed answers. But I couldn't just come out and ask Katie. If she was hiding something, she wouldn't admit it without proof. No, I needed to be smart about this. I decided to start with Mike. After all, he was the outsider here, the one who didn't belong. If anyone cracked under pressure, it would be him. That evening, while Katie was at her art class, I found Mike in the garage, tinkering with the lawnmower. "Hey," I said, leaning against the doorway. "Got a minute?" Mike looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sure. What's up?" I stepped inside, trying to keep my tone casual. "I just wanted to check in, make sure everything's okay. You've been here for a while now, and I just, wanted to see how you're doing." He smiled, his expression easy and relaxed. "I'm doing good. Better. Actually, you and Katie have been amazing, letting me stay here. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." I nodded. studying his face for any sign of guilt or discomfort. It's no problem. I mean, we're happy to help, but you and Katie seem pretty close. You've been spending a lot of time together. Mike froze for just a fraction of a second, barely long enough to register, but I caught it. Then he shrugged, his smile returning. Yeah, I guess we have. She's great. It's been nice having someone to talk to. Just talk? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. His smile faltered. What are you getting at? I stepped closer, my eyes narrowing. You tell me, Mike, because I've been noticing things. The way you two look at each other. The way you act when I'm around. So, why don't you just come clean and tell me what's going on? For a moment, he looked like he was going to deny everything. But then he sighed, dropping the rag onto the workbench. Look, man, I don't know what you think is happening, but Katie's been going through a rough time. She misses you. She feels like you've been distant, and I guess I've just been trying to be there for her. Be there for her? I repeated, my voice rising. That's my job, not yours. You're supposed to be a guest here, not. I stopped myself, shaking my head. Forget it. Just stay out of her way, okay? Let me handle my own marriage. Mike nodded, looking genuinely contrite. I hear you. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry if I've overstepped. That was never my intention. I didn't believe him. Not entirely. But I let it go for now. I needed to focus on Katie. If there was something happening between them, she was the one I needed to confront. That night, after Mike had gone to bed, I cornered Katie in the kitchen. She was wiping down the counters, humming softly to herself, and she didn't notice me come in at first. Katie, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. She turned, startled. Hey, you scared me. Sorry, I said, stepping closer. We need to talk. Her smile faded. Okay, what's going on? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. I know something's been going on between you and Mike. I don't know what, exactly, but I'm not stupid. I see the way you act around each other. Katie's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she looked genuinely hurt. You think I'm cheating on you? With Mike? I don't know what to think, I admitted, but I can't keep ignoring it. The way you laugh with him, the way you spend all this time together, it doesn't feel right. It feels like you're shutting me out. She set the cloth down, crossing her arms over her chest. I can't believe this. After everything we've been through, you think I'd betray you like that? You think I'd risk our marriage? I don't want to believe it, I said, my voice breaking, but I can't shake the feeling that something's not right, and I need to know the truth. Katie stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. You're right. Something isn't right, but it's not what you think. What is it, then? I demanded. Just tell me. She hesitated, looking down at the floor. I can't. Not yet. Not yet? I repeated, incredulous. What the hell does that mean? It means I'm not ready, she said, her voice rising. This isn't just about you, okay? It's about me and what I'm going through. And if you can't trust me enough to give me the time I need, then maybe we have bigger problems than Mike. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. She pushed past me, grabbing her keys and heading for the door. I need some air, she said over her shoulder. Don't wait up. I stood there, stunned, as the door slammed shut behind her. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. What the hell was going on? And how much more of this could I take? Katie didn't come back until well past midnight. I had been sitting in the dark living room, waiting, the sound of the clock ticking on the wall growing louder with every passing minute. When I finally heard her car pull into the driveway, my chest tightened. Part of me wanted to rush outside and demand answers. The other part just wanted to crawl into bed and pretend this wasn't happening. When she walked through the door, her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. She glanced at me briefly, then looked away, her expression a mix of exhaustion and defiance. Where were you? I asked quietly, my voice strained from hours of silence. Driving, she said simply. I needed to clear my head. Clear your head about what, Katie? About us? About Mike? She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I don't want to fight right now. I'm too tired. That's convenient, I said bitterly, standing up. You're tired. Well, guess what? I'm tired too. I'm tired of feeling like I'm the only one who's fighting for this marriage. Her eyes snapped to mine, a flash of anger breaking through the exhaustion. Don't you dare put this all on me. I've been trying to hold everything together while you've been checked out, buried in work, pretending everything's fine. Checked out, I repeated, stunned. Katie, I've been working to provide for us, to keep this house running. Everything I do is for us. No, she said sharply, her voice breaking. Everything you do is for you. For your pride, your career. And you know what? I've been fine with that. I've supported you every step of the way. But when have you supported me? When have you asked me how I'm feeling? Or if I'm okay? Her words hit me like a slap. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the truth was, I didn't have an answer. She was right. I hadn't been paying attention. Not really. I'd been so focused on keeping everything afloat that I hadn't noticed how much she was struggling. But that didn't explain everything. It didn't explain Mike, or the way they acted around each other. It didn't explain the secrets and the late-night phone calls. Okay, I said finally, my voice trembling. Maybe I haven't been the best husband. I can admit that. But that doesn't excuse what's been going on with you and Mike. You can't stand there and tell me there's nothing there. Katie flinched, her face crumpling. It's not what you think, she said softly, her voice barely audible. Then tell me what it is, I said, stepping closer. Because right now, all I can think about is the worst-case scenario. And it's killing me. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes filled with a sadness that made my chest ache. I can't, she whispered. Not yet. I clenched my fists, swallowing the anger that threatened to boil over. Then I don't know how much longer I can do this, Katie. I love you, but I can't keep living like this. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. I know. Without another word, she turned and walked upstairs, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The following days were a blur. Katie and I barely spoke, our conversations limited to the bare minimum. She spent most of her time in the spare room, painting or staring out the window, while I threw myself into work. Mike, sensing the tension, kept to himself, spending long hours away from the house and returning only to sleep. The silence was suffocating. Every time I tried to bring up the subject, Katie would shut me down, her walls firmly in place. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, afraid to push too hard and risk breaking what little was left of our relationship. Then, one evening, I came home to find Mike sitting on the back porch, a bottle of beer in his hand. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. Mind if I join you? I asked, though I wasn't really asking. Sure, he said, gesturing to the chair next to him. I sat down, staring out at the dark yard. The silence stretched between us, heavy and awkward. Finally, I spoke. Mike, I said, my voice low. I need to know the truth. About you and Katie. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a long sip of his beer, his gaze fixed on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost sad. There's nothing going on between us, he said. At least, not in the way you think. What does that mean? I demanded, my frustration boiling over. Either there's something, or there isn't. Which is it? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I've been where you are, feeling like the world's falling apart, like you don't know who to trust. And I'm sorry if I've made things worse. But Katie, she's dealing with something big, something she hasn't figured out how to tell you yet. What is it? I asked, my chest tightening. If you know something, you need to tell me. Mike shook his head. It's not my place. She needs to be the one to tell you. But you should know this. She loves you. More than you realize. I stared at him, my mind racing. His words didn't make sense, didn't fit with the narrative I'd built in my head. But there was something in his tone, something sincere, that gave me pause. Before I could respond, the back door opened, and Katie stepped outside. She froze when she saw us, her eyes darting between me and Mike. What's going on? She asked, her voice wary. Nothing, Mike said quickly, standing up. I was just leaving. As he walked past her, he gave her a look, one I couldn't quite interpret. Then he disappeared into the house, leaving us alone on the porch. Katie crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on me. What did he say to you? Not much, I admitted. Just that you're going through something. Something you haven't told me. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. I told you I'm not ready. And I told you I can't wait forever, I said, my voice breaking. Katie, whatever this is, it's tearing us apart. Please, just tell me the truth. For a moment, I thought she was going to walk away again. But then, to my surprise, she sat down next to me, her face pale and drawn. Okay, she said softly. You want the truth? Here it is. My heart pounded as I braced myself for what she was about to say. Katie sat there for a moment, staring at her hands. The seconds dragged on, and the tension was unbearable. I didn't dare interrupt her, afraid she'd change her mind and retreat back into the walls she'd built between us. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been seeing a therapist. The words caught me off guard. Of all the possibilities I'd considered, this wasn't one of them. A therapist? I repeated, unsure how to react. Why didn't you tell me? She glanced at me, her expression a mix of guilt and exhaustion. Because I didn't know how to. And because I felt like you wouldn't understand. Try me, I said, leaning forward. I'm here now. Just tell me what's going on. Katie took a shaky breath. After the miscarriage, I thought I was okay. I told myself I was fine, that I could move on. But I wasn't. I've been carrying so much grief, so much guilt, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And when you buried yourself in work, I felt like I was completely alone. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd known the miscarriage had affected her deeply. It had affected both of us, but I hadn't realized just how much she'd been struggling. I'd assumed she was coping in her own way, just like I had. But I'd been wrong. And Mike? I asked cautiously, where does he fit into all this? Katie hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. When he moved in, I was at my lowest point. He was there. He listened. He didn't try to fix anything or tell me to be strong. He just let me feel what I needed to feel. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so alone. I swallowed hard, trying to process her words. So, you've been confiding in him instead of me? It's not like that, she said quickly. I wasn't trying to replace you or shut you out, but you were so distant, and I didn't know how to reach you. Mike was just easy to talk to. Her words stung, but I couldn't deny there was some truth to them. I had been distant, throwing myself into work as a way to avoid dealing with my own grief. But it still didn't explain everything. What about the way you act around him? I asked. The looks, the laughter, the late nights? Do you have feelings for him? Katie's eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. No. God, no. Mike has been a friend, nothing more. If it ever seemed like something else, I'm sorry. I never meant for you to feel that way. I wanted to believe her, desperately, but doubt still lingered in the back of my mind, gnawing at the edges of her explanation. Then why has this felt like such a secret? Why couldn't you just tell me about the therapy, about everything? Because I was scared, she admitted, her voice cracking. Scared that you'd think I was weak or broken. Scared that you'd see me differently. And maybe a part of me was scared you wouldn't care. The last part cut deep. Katie, I said, my voice shaking. I care. I've always cared. But I can't help you if you don't let me in. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know, and I'm sorry. I've been so caught up in my own pain that I didn't see how much I was hurting you. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, the weight of everything we'd left unsaid hanging between us. It was the first real conversation we'd had in months, and it felt like a fragile thread, holding us together but threatening to snap at any moment. Finally, I asked the question that had been eating at me for weeks. So, there's nothing going on between you and Mike? Nothing I need to worry about? She shook her head firmly. No, I promise you, there's nothing. Mike has been a friend, but that's all. I would never betray you like that. Her words sounded sincere, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we could work through this. Maybe it wasn't too late. But even as I tried to convince myself, there was a part of me that couldn't quite let go of the doubt. Katie had told me the truth, or at least part of it, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. And I was right. The next day, I decided to talk to Mike again. If Katie was telling the truth, then he should be able to back her up. But when I went to his room to confront him, I found it empty. His suitcase was gone, and the bed was neatly made. He'd left a note on the nightstand. Hey man, thanks for letting me stay here. It's time for me to move on and figure things out on my own. I appreciate everything you and Katie have done for me. Take care. No explanation. No goodbye. Just an abrupt departure that left more questions than answers. When I showed Katie the note, she looked genuinely surprised. I didn't know he was planning to leave, she said, her brow furrowed. Did you say something to him? I confronted him, I admitted. I told him I thought something was going on between you two. Katie sighed, shaking her head. That's probably why he left. He didn't want to cause any more problems. Maybe she was right. Or maybe Mike had secrets of his own. Secrets he'd taken with him when he walked out the door. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that this chapter of our lives wasn't quite finished. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many pieces of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. And deep down, I knew the truth would come out eventually. It always does. In the days after Mike's sudden departure, the house felt emptier, quieter. Katie and I tiptoed around each other, trying to navigate the fragile truce we'd reached. She promised to include me in her therapy journey, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same page. Or at least trying to be. But the doubts wouldn't let go. Something still felt incomplete. Every time I replayed the conversations in my head, Katie's explanations, Mike's vague reassurances, the little moments I'd witnessed between them, I couldn't shake the sense that I was missing something. Like there was a piece of the puzzle still hidden, just out of reach. It wasn't until a week later that I found it. I had been cleaning out the garage, trying to distract myself from the swirling thoughts in my head. Mike had left a few boxes behind, shoved into the corner, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to go through them before dropping them off at a donation center. Most of it was harmless. Old clothes, a coffee maker, a stack of books. But at the bottom of one box, I found a small, leather-bound journal. I hesitated, turning it over in my hands. It felt wrong to invade his privacy, but curiosity, and the lingering suspicion in my gut, got the better of me. The entries were sparse, written in a scrawling, uneven hand. They started months before he moved in, chronicling his financial troubles, the collapse of his marriage, and the struggles of starting over. But as I flipped through the pages, something caught my eye, a date that lined up with the weeks after he'd come to stay with us. I didn't mean for this to happen. She was hurting, and I was there. I don't know what I was thinking, or if I was thinking at all. She says it was a mistake, but it doesn't feel like one. It feels like something I've wanted for a long time. My heart stopped. I read the passage again, then again, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the words didn't change. He didn't name her, but he didn't have to. I knew. The ground seemed to shift beneath me as the realization hit. This was it. The truth I'd been chasing, the answer I wasn't ready for. Katie and Mike hadn't just been friends. Whatever she'd said, whatever she'd promised, there was more to the story than she'd admitted. I slammed the journal shut, my hands trembling. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one more painful than the last. The images, the moments that had seemed innocent at the time, now took on a darker, more sinister meaning. Her laughter, their closeness, the late nights, they weren't just coincidences. They were signs. When Katie came home that evening, I was waiting for her in the living room. The journal sat on the coffee table, its leather cover a stark reminder of the betrayal it contained. "What's this?" she asked, frowning as she walked into the room. "Mike's journal," I said flatly. "I found it in the garage." Her eyes flicked to the table, then back to me. And you lied to me," I said, my voice shaking with barely suppressed anger. "You told me there was nothing between you and Mike. But this," I jabbed a finger at the journal, "says otherwise." Katie froze, her face draining of color. I can explain." "Can you?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Because I don't think there's anything you can say that'll make this okay." She sat down slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. "It wasn't what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "It happened once. Just once. And it was a mistake. I told him that. I told him it could never happen again." I stared at her, the words cutting through me like a knife. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do this to me? To us?" Tears streamed down her face, and she shook her head. "I don't know. I was in such a dark place, and he was there. He was kind, and he listened, and I let my guard down. But it didn't mean anything. It wasn't about you, or about us. It was a moment of weakness, and I've regretted it every single day." "Not about us?" I snapped. "Katie, Everything about this is about us. You let him into our home, into our lives, and then I broke off, unable to finish the sentence. How am I supposed to move past this? She sobbed, her shoulders shaking. I don't know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I swear to you, it's over. I chose you. I've always chosen you. The room fell into silence, the weight of her confession hanging heavy in the air. I wanted to scream, to rage, to lash out at her for what she'd done. But all I felt was an overwhelming sense of loss. The woman I thought I knew, the marriage I thought we had. It was all gone, shattered by a single act of betrayal. I need time, I said finally, my voice hollow. I can't do this right now. Katie nodded, her face crumpling. Take all the time you need. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I promise. But as I walked out of the room, leaving her behind, I couldn't help but wonder if some things were too broken to fix. That night, I slept in the guest room. The bed was cold and unfamiliar, but it didn't matter. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind was too busy replaying everything, trying to make sense of the chaos. I didn't know what the future held, for me or for us. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same.